Thank you, ma'am.
Lanita, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry about that. Okay, so as that. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fifth day of the JC Anthony Colloquium. We're very happy to have you all here today. Today, we have our speaker, Mr. John Bhoopalan, who will be in conversation with Professor Cherian Alexander for the session titled Dalit Literature and Dalit Christian Identities. Our speaker for today, Mr. Sundar John Bhoopalan, is an assistant professor at the Canadian Mennonite University in Winnipeg in Canada. He's the author of the book Memory, Grief and Agency, which was published in 2017. He's also a columnist at The Blueprint. The Blueprint is a digital publication that explores identity, society, culture, human rights, and freedom by centering marginalized voices with an emphasis on South Asia and its diaspora, who will be in conversation with Dr. Cherian. Professor Cherian Alexander is a collector of stories and information. He makes sure that his students not only get involved with the text, but he teleports them all the way to that time and era. He takes his students beyond the classroom, and his numerous facts and histories are always great to know. I now hand over the session to the both of them. Thank you so much.
I can't even begin to say how immensely thrilled I am to meet John after so many years. Now, how do I address you, Dr. Bhupalan? Because he's, our acquaintance here at St. Joseph's and all of us senior teachers here know him well, Professor Etienne, myself. We all have either taught or interacted with him directly. So he's I'm getting a message saying bad network quality. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, fine. Yeah, you will be, you are officially Dr. John Bhoopalan, but to us, you're still our dear John. Thank you for that. You know, I was just reading your book, John, and it was so illuminating and so well written and quite deep and profound. Especially those first two chapters, the introduction and the first chapter. I've only got that far. I'm sure I'm going to. It's breathless. I want to finish the book by tonight, late tonight. So congratulations on a tremendous book, which is both manages to be both scholarly and at the same time directly aimed at the lay person. You know, there's so much that even someone without any academic background can get from your book. You know, just an educated lay person without too much knowledge of theology also can benefit so much from your book. So thank you very much for that book, and I hope we'll be able to acquire it for our library and so on. Is the book available in India? It is. Okay, right. I remember you as a student, but then after that, we've also interacted after you became an academic yourself, and you know, we've had some very fruitful conversations whenever you visited India, and you always dropped in. So I'm just very happy to have this opportunity to introduce or to just set the ball rolling. Friends, today we are going to look at a very important area, which is that of the relationship between religion and power. And as John maintains in his book, you know, we can't kid ourselves into thinking that we are all kind of post-religious, we are post-theological and so on, in the sense that whether we are secular or religious, we all have certain notions in our head which are either directly theological or analogues of the theological, secular analogues of the same. And so in that sense, you can't escape that, because a lot of our practices emerge from our imagination and of ourselves, nature, the relationship between human beings and other human beings, and all those things. And these things, he argues in his book, are ritualized and structured in such a way that most of the time, we are unconscious of the power structures we operate with, and so the great merit of his book is that he problematizes this and exposes this and opens this out for us to think about. The whole question of the Dalits and their identity and the Dalit struggle for dignity, for agency, and so on, is something all of us are familiar with. But there is a lot that is still hidden, and a book like Bhupalan's book makes that explicit for us to think about and reflect upon. I was just, the gap between religion on the one hand, in terms of its theoretical claims, in terms of its claims, truth claims, etc., and practice, the practice of religion is indeed a big one, actually, because the scriptures of both religions, in this particular case that are discussed here, Hinduism and Christianity, have some truly emancipatory teachings, egalitarian ones too. They also have things that affirm hierarchy and stratified societies. But on the one hand, you have, for example, in Hinduism, this wonderful Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam slogan, all the world is one family, may all beings be happy, and so on. But on the other hand, you have the egregious caste system, which ritualizes the humiliation, as he points out, of people who belong to the untouchable, who are dismissed as the untouchables. On the other hand, in the Western world, you have the Christian teaching that says that, where Jesus says, I came to you hungry, I came to you naked, I came to you as a stranger and you welcomed me. Or conversely, I came as all these and you did not welcome me. The moral argument there is that only those who welcome the stranger, the orphan, the widow, and so on in the name of God and give them dignity, love, and compassion are the ones honored by God, are the ones whom God loves, are the ones whom God affirms. That's the teaching. But look at what's happening in the US border, where people seeking refuge are being turned away by evangelical Christians who seem to have seen no inconsistency between their professed faith on the one hand and turning away those who seek refuge on the other. So this contradiction is ingrained in these structures. So John Bhoopalan's book makes all these things explicit. Of course, most of it is focused on India, but he does draw parallels with the American experience as well. So, John, without further ado, I would like to hand over the session to you, and then you can lay out your presentation first. You could probably take about 40 minutes, or would you like a little longer? I think you're muted.
I'm actually think I do have a presentation that I'll make, but it would be at least half of 40 minutes, with the intention that that we'll have actually a full two-way or multi-way conversation, because I feel like, when we are able to engage with each other and ask the kinds of questions that are arising in our hearts and minds, then the conversation is great. Otherwise, I'm just a little afraid that I might monopolize the conversation, assuming too many things. So I just want to present like some skeleton kind of framework, and then maybe just open it up for discussion with your facilitation. Is that okay, Dr. Cherian?
Yeah, that's perfect, John. And I'm sure we can, you could start off with what you have on your mind uppermost. And then when you've feel like you can throw it open for further discussion and questions, you could do that. So we will listen to you first, and it was interesting to see in your book that you talk about your upbringing here in Bangalore and the early experiences you had, the conscious experiences, on the one hand of the positive side of Christianity, but on the other hand, the gap between theory and practice, between precept and practice that you found eventually also. So good.
And no, thank you for mentioning that, Dr. Cherin. And that would be the last part of my PowerPoint, where I actually start, well, I end with my story, but then in some sense, that's the end is the beginning of the conversation. So I'll actually come to the very thing that you were mentioning at the end about my own experience and my own Dalit Christian story, which is how I want to end and just open up things for discussion. Before I share the PowerPoint here, so that's maybe a little bit of a heads up to whoever needs that heads up to give me permission, but I think it should be okay. But before I put the PowerPoint up here, just wanted to start with a token of gratitude here. So Dr. Cherin, it's great to see you. It's really great to see you. I remember my classes with you so well. And even today when I teach, right, even today when I teach, you may have forgotten because, you teach so many batches of students. But there was one session where you came and spoke about the Middle East, and you said, so who called this the Middle East? From whose perspective? Well, it's not Middle East from where we are in India. From India, it's West Asia, right?
Okay.
And that was one of many aha moments I had in your class, right? And so the importance of perspective, how a very simple thing like, why do we call it Middle East? It's not Middle East to us, it's West Asia, right? Things like that have really stuck with me over the years and continues to inform so many ways in which I think and write and do things. And gratitude also to Dr. Arulmani here for extending the invitation. One of my deepest regrets during my time at St. Joseph's College is simply that I did not take a class with Dr. Arulmani. Now looking back, I'm like, oh my God, where was I? And anyway, I'll say more about that at the end of the PowerPoint, but really happy and honored to be here.
Professor Etienne is also here.
Oh, great. So then that's really Dr. Arulmani. That's one of my deepest regrets, which I've told you before. But it's really such an honor to be with you all. So thanks for having me here. So I have a few things that I just like to share. Some of these things might be repetitive because of the nature of the course itself. So if it's repetitive, I hope you'll just bear with me and just be patient with me. I want to offer in the PowerPoint itself some big picture issues, and then I'll end with my story. And I want to share my story with you as the last thing before we kind of open things up for discussion. So just bear with me here as I...
Are you up at an unearthly hour, John? That must be very early. You're in Canada right now.
I woke up at an unearthly hour. Right now it's 6:45 a.m., which is not bad, but I woke up a little earlier than that. And I'm going to look at how to share screen here. Teams is a bit new for me. Open share tray, I guess. That's... Would somebody be able to tell me how to...
There is an arrow mark, upwards arrow.
Yes.
You click on that.
Yeah.
Does it give you the option of share screen?
Not yet. It says...
Hand over that to him.
Okay. I click on that up arrow and then now it's pointing downwards.
Then you've got a window and so on. You click on that window.
Yeah, it's not...
it's not opening for you, right?
Yeah, maybe there's something about references or something here.
Trishti, can you help him?
Everyone has been made a presenter. So, John, sir, you should be able to present. Let me just check. Okay, when you click on the share button, what does it say for you? What options open up?
That's the one that says, that's the up arrow. Just next to leave.
Or will you be able to share your presentation with us? We can screen it here. Wait, you're on mute.
You're muted.
So then I'll have to, can I attach a file here?
Yeah. Are you able to access the chat box? Oh yeah, we do. Okay.
Yeah. Insert quote link. Sorry, you all, just hold on here.
Not at all, no problem.
How do I share things? I'm clicking on the message here.
When you click on share content, does it open up screen and window for you? Two options.
Share content, by the way, John, is the one with the up arrow. You click on that once again. Let's go through that process.
Somebody says system preferences might be where my problem is. So
you won't be able to share the PPT in the chat box because it's the webinar chat. So,
right.
Yes.
So then
I'll leave my email ID here. Will you be able to mail it to me?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Akanksha, please leave yours as well.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thanks you all. Just hold on. I just sent it to
Anushka for this. Okay.
right.
Anushka, just check if you can.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'm not able to access the chat box. My network is very bad today, so I won't be able to.
I did send you the email. So whenever you get the email, if you just can open the PowerPoint and start sharing, then you'll just have to put up with my annoying next prompt, and then we'll take it from there.
You're in Winnipeg right now?
I am in Winnipeg right now. So that is Central Time in the North American context. And this is 4 hours north of North Dakota. So, and Winnipeg is infamous for being one of the coldest cities.
It's part of a Manitoba province, I think.
It's part of Manitoba. So it's plains, it's prairies, and it's very windy because of that. And
but
also,
has winter set in already?
It's technically the fall, but it's -2 right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you are.
Thanks, folks. Thanks, folks. So that's me. So we can just change to the next slide, and you'll see that in the next slide. Whenever you're ready to change it to the next slide, you can maximize it or leave it like this. That's up to you. But I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. So just go back to the previous slide. And a land acknowledgement is something that is customary here, but this is more than words, as I've come to believe for myself. So I'm speaking from Winnipeg in Manitoba in Canada, and I want to begin by acknowledging the first peoples of this land where I'm speaking from, on which Canadian Mennonite University, where I teach, and other places in Winnipeg now stand. And the first peoples of this land who have cared for this land are the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Dakota, the Dene, and the Métis people. And I just want to acknowledge that land on which I am. And I want to invite us, as we move to the next slide, if you can just bring that back, and fantastic. If we can just move to the next slide. I want to begin by just inviting us to mark a moment of silence to respect the dead, those murdered by caste-based cruelty. We won't take too long, but I just want to maintain a few moments, just a few seconds of silence to respect the dead here. Thanks for joining me in that. As we move to the next slide, I want to, since we are discussing Dalit Christian identities and also Dalit literature, I want to begin, I want to have this slide up here. This comes from one of my favorite Dalit Christian writers, Bama, and to make the point that writing is never neutral. Right. So here, Bama, the author of many books, one of my favorite is Karukku, but this is one mum. And in the book, she refers to this writers' meet that she attended in Paris. And she says this, I'll just read the quote out here for us. We were 20 writers there. I felt so out of place because their values were totally different from mine. I was totally disheartened by one particular incident. I was talking about the 5 Dalits in Haryana who had been brutally killed for processing beef. I commented on the violent mentality of the caste Hindus that had led to this massacre. An Indian writer who was there argued that the cow was a holy, sacred animal for Hindus, and so the killing of Dalits was justified. And then Bama refers to this incident at the writers' meet in Paris and refers to this as a wound that has accompanied her, right? So the point I really want to make here is that there are wounds, that the world is wounded, that writers are never neutral. Writers in their relationship to the wounds of the world will gravitate towards this side or that side, and that matters in writing, right? That's simply a point I want to make through Bama, the Dalit Christian writer here. And this incident, right, where the 5 Dalits are killed in Haryana by a mob, happened in 2002, and that always kind of sticks with me because that was when I began at St. Joseph's. I was right there, and really, I did not know this. You know, I did not know this. And during the discussion, I really want to talk about social conditions, the thing that kind of inform our imaginations, right? What falls in our frame of thinking and writing and what does not fall into that frame, and how writing can perhaps help us to think about that. So this is one slide. And when we move to the next slide, I'll say more. I will not today describe atrocity after atrocity. That is not the intention for this discussion. But I do want to point us to 2 films that you might already be aware of, Fundri and Sairat. And if you're watching the movie, watch it in Marathi. It's directed by a Dalit Marathi director, Nagraj Manjule, who's just a fantastic director. Both of these movies make the point about the continuance of caste-based cruelty in India today, which is very important for Dalit Christian identity and also Dalit literature, right? Let's move to the next slide. Who are Dalits? You are already well aware of who Dalits are, but I want to just say a couple of things. But first, by reminding us that every 6th Indian is Dalit, right? This is a point that Narendra Yadav makes in his book Untouchables, where he talks about his family's journey. And he says every 6th Indian is Dalit, like over 16.25% of India's population is Dalit, which makes every 6th Indian Dalit. Let's move to the next slide here. And this is an image by a Dalit Christian writer by the name Joy Devakani. And caste has origin stories, right? Now, there are some origin stories that are discriminatory. Hinduism is such a broad umbrella, and there are all kinds of material that one can gravitate towards. But in a certain dominant Hindu rendering of Dalit origin. This is a story that most of us might be familiar with, where the story is told that, some communities come from God's head, some communities come from God's arms, and then some from the thighs. And then at the very bottom are the Shudras, the servant class, the worker class, however we want to call them. This is a story of origin that people draw from, even if they don't tell the story of origin. It's a kind of story of origin that informs people's thinking even today. But I want to point us to two things also additionally in this slide. One is just the Dalit clapback, right, which is another way of saying that resistance to discrimination is as old as discrimination, right? So as we are talking about Dalit literature and Dalit Christian identities, I want to caution both myself and others also not to fall into the trap where we think of Dalit identities as victimized identities and nothing else, right? Dalits continue to be victims of caste-based violence. That does not change, but resistance simultaneously is as old as caste-based discrimination, which is why I like this image by Joy Devagani. At the end, you see that she's representing the Dalit communities at the bottom who have a life, who have a community. And the character in blue, and this might not come as a surprise to you, is a reference there implicitly to B.R. Ambedkar, who is, of course, a major Dalit icon in India. Just representing the Dalit communities have had community, have had their own stories of origin that do not buy into this other story of origin that is discriminatory, right? We'll go to the next slide, and I want to introduce another instance of what I'm calling a Dalit clapback here, which is both literal and literary. This comes from the very well-known poet Gaddar. I'm paraphrasing loosely here when Gaddar says, some say they come from God's head and others say they come from God's arms, thighs, and feet. But we Dalits, we come from where all human beings come from. Right. And that is the kind of Dalit resistance to caste-based cruelty. What do you mean you come from here and there? We all come from the same place. It's a great kind of comeback, a very human and humane, a sensual, earthy story of origin here that is part of Dalit thinking that I wanted to present for us. Let's move to the next slide. Dalit clapback happens all the time, right? This is one clapback that I was part of, and this was, of course, referring to that the thing that went viral, the TV series that went viral, Indian Matchmaking. So me and a couple of other Dalit and indigenous Indian commentators got together to have a discussion on caste and social violence, and why Indian matchmaking is not funny, right? So this slide gives us a sense of when that happened. And this video discussion is available on Facebook, that is accessible by all if you just look for caste and social violence, why Indian matchmaking is not funny. But this is another instance of what I'm calling clapback, right? The Dalits simply don't accept things that are handed out to them. We have things to say in return, in other words, right? Let's go back. Let's go to the next slide here. So this is something that you're already aware of. So this might be repetitive. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. But Dalits, the significance of the term, especially in relation to this colloquium's themes of self-representation, questions of justice, and enabling alliance, I wanted to say just maybe one or two things about why the term is significant. And so let's move to the next slide to see a couple of things. One is, why do we call ourselves Dalit? First, I want to say Dalit is a political identity, right? Dalit comes from a root which means oppressed, crushed, broken. And some people ask, why hold on to such a negative identity that means oppressed, crushed, broken? Aren't Dalits more than that? Yes, Dalits are more than that, but Dalit is a political identity, right? In other words, the term points to how, so you see how by saying one is oppressed, crushed, broken on the one hand, one is pointing to the fact that maybe someone is doing the work of oppressing, crushing, and breaking. That's how the term is political, right? So that's one thing I want to say. I have a second and a third thing. So we'll move to the second of these three slides. where I talk about the significance of the term Dalit. So first, Dalit is a political identity. Here I'm saying Dalit is also a positive group identity, right? Because Dalit serves as an umbrella term that seeks to include several distinct communities that have suffered caste-based discrimination. So one might be Mala, Madiga, Parayar, Arundhati, Chamar, Mang, and so on. But coming together under the umbrella of Dalit then allows Dalit to be this positive group identity. That is another significance of the term. There's a third thing that I'd like to say in the next slide. And that is that Dalit is an aspirational identity for solidarity, right? So Dalit allows for solidarity with other communities. So from the very beginning, even the Dalit Panther Party highlighted how anti-caste and ecumenical meanings are embedded in the term Dalit, right? So the Dalit Panthers manifesto had a broad definition of the term Dalit. And I want to point to this as, this kind of aspirational identity for solidarity, right? This includes Dalits, tribals and Adivasis, India's indigenous people, neo-Buddhists, Ambedkarites, the working class, landless poor, peasants, women. You see how the definition allows for solidarity across groups, right? So that is another significance of the term. I want to give two examples of how Dalit is an aspirational identity for solidarity. And this is a bit self-referential, but I will offer these two examples to describe what I mean by aspirational identity for solidarity across groups. So when we move to the next slide, that will be one example. And this is my own book that Dr. Cherian kindly referred to in the beginning. And I really believe that today anti-discrimination work has to be global in every sense of the word, right? So because I'm in Canada, I use global in this kind of transatlantic, trans-Pacific kind of way. But global can also mean within the Indian context, conversation between different regions, between different groups and so on and so forth. In my book, I generate a conversation between the caste context and the racialized context of the United States. So that's one way in which I see Dalit being this aspirational identity for solidarity with other marginalized groups. In the next slide, I'm going to give you another example of what and how Dalit is an aspirational identity. And this is a screenshot from my essay, Caste is More Than a South Asian Problem. And this is for the online digital news media here, the blueprint.news. That's where this is from. And where I make the point how and why caste needs to be seen as more than a South Asian problem, right? Let's go to the next slide here. This is another example here, and this is actually a very recent one that just came out in a journal called the Bangalore Theological Forum, which is published by the United Theological College, where I got my basic theological degree. So after St. Joseph's, I took a year off to figure out what I wanted to do, and I decided to do theology at the United Theological College. And this is a journal published by the United Theological College. And you see here the title of the essay that I have co-authored with R.C. Jongte, who is a Mizo-liberation theologian, talks about how one needs to renew Dalit indigenous theological dialogue. So I just have a screenshot of the first page, but it's from this journal if folks are interested in finding out more about that. But this is another instance of how Dalit is an aspirational identity for conversation between marginalized communities. So let's move to the next one. The story of Dalit Christianity. I have two slides that kind of summarizes in some sense the story of Dalit Christianity. This first one, I'll make a couple of points here. Christian missionaries historically went to those at the very top with the story of Jesus. So this is how actually most missionaries in most parts of the world operated, including in India. They thought that if they could go to the very top of whoever they thought was at the top of society, then they believed in the trickle-down effect. Now, I won't be too crude in my remarks here, but the trickle-down effect simply does not work. I always like to say that there are only two things that trickle down. And if you're wondering what those two things are, then just imagine the image of a bathroom. there are only two things that trickle down. Certainly money does not trickle down. Certainly power does not trickle down. So this is the mistake that Christian missionaries made, right? They went to the top thinking that if they converted those at the top, right? In other words, if they converted the most dominant caste communities in India, then they would in turn share the news about Jesus to the rest of India, right? But the irony was that those at the top actually had no use for Jesus, because here was a Jesus who hung out with the least and the last, with those on the margins. And so they said, why would we want to believe in a Jesus who hung out with those at the bottom? That's how we have our identity, by distinguishing ourselves from those at the bottom. Why would we even go to those at the bottom, right? But those at the bottom, Dalit communities, among other communities, actually sought to convert to Christianity. This is the story of Dalit Christianity in India. That Dalits came to Christian missionaries and said, we want to convert to Christianity because we like this Jesus who hung out with those on the margins, right? And that led to what many people call as mass conversions. Some people call that as community conversion, or even spirit conversion, where something moved Dalit communities when they heard the story of Jesus as someone who hung out with those on the margins. That Jesus spoke about liberation and salvation for those on the margins, right? So this is how Dalits historically converted to Christianity, and that's why Dalit Christianity is a major force, right? So that's one slide. Let's go to the next slide here. And so now Dalits who are on the margins, Dalits who were treated and called as untouchables formerly, no people, now became God's people when they converted to Christianity, right? Now here in the second point, I want to make a connection to literature. So here with Dalits who were denied access to scripture, and this is dominant Hindu scripture, right? And here think literature. So denied access to literature, now had access to scripture, right? So Dalits were denied access to scripture. So also other communities like Shudras also, who were denied access to Hindu scripture, right? And it was a punishable crime if one sought to access that. So people who were denied access to education now had access to education and power. Historically, in the Indian context, this is something you already know, so I won't repeat it too much, except to remind us that access to scripture was also access to literature and education, right? And so when denying access to literature, it is also denying access to education. So in other words, Dalit Christianity empowered a people who were historically disempowered. So that's the story of Dalit Christianity, right? So we're coming to the end here. So as we move to the next slide, and that Dalit Christian identities are more nuanced than this big picture, right? So this is where you can stop sharing the slide here, so you can see my face a little bigger, and and then I want to share just a bit of my story here, and then I'm going to stop talking, and then I look to Dr. Cherian to facilitate a more wider discussion. I am super interested in the questions that you have about Dalit literature and Dalit Christian identities, and let's talk more about that. In the Dalit Christian context, it's so rich, right? It is so rich. So in my story is that my father is Dalit. So from my father's side, my grandfather is Mala, which is a Dalit community in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana areas, and my father's mother comes from the Parayar community, which is a Dalit community in Tamil Nadu, right? So my father is Dalit. My mother is Naidu, which is actually a locally dominant caste community in the Andhra Pradesh and Telangana context. So that is me, right? Those are my parents. So when we grew up, my father always said, we are SC, I am SC, right? That's the term that he used, scheduled caste, which is the government term for affirmative action in India, right? So we always, as kids, knew the term, but it did not mean anything to us except as like information. Okay, my father is SC. Okay, I know that. How does that matter? Why does that matter? Those things never came up, right? So we grew up for the most part not thinking about caste at all, right? On the one hand, this was actually super freeing because we never saw people with the lens of caste. We didn't see ourselves with the lens of caste. We didn't see others with the lens of caste. It was super freeing because we simply engaged with everybody. But it was also constricting because it did not enable me and my siblings to come to terms with how caste-based violence continues to be such a powerful force in India that takes lives and takes dignity by the day, by the hour, right? So that's the constriction that I feel so terrible about, a major, major regret. I did not know the word Dalit until my theological education. In other words, when I got my BSc in environmental science, zoology and chemistry at St. Joseph's College, I did not know the word Dalit. And that tells me, right, that that knowing the term, knowing our histories, knowing our identities matters. And I just did not know that in the same way. For Dalit Christians, part of not fully embracing the Dalit identity, right, kind of being a little embarrassed about the Dalit identities, because the story of Dalit Christianity is that Dalits left behind their undignified identities and now have a new identity in Christianity, right? That's the story. So then Dalit, then some Dalit Christians will say, then why hold on to the term Dalit? Didn't we leave that behind? And the argument that I want to present here is that Dalit actually serves as a prefix to Christian identity. So Dalit is like a rudder of sorts, if you imagine a boat, and that's what allows the boat to steer in directions that are liberatory and freedom giving, right? I'll tell you a story of my own family. I won't name names, so don't dig in too much here and don't ask me for more. But I'll tell you one thing. So theological education, I learned the word Dalit. So I went to my father and I said, do you know the word Dalit? He said, yes. We don't need to be interested in that. And I said, but why? People die by the day. Caste-based violence happens all the time. Shouldn't Dalit inform our Christian identities? And then we still debate about this, but there was one wedding at which my dad and me were there, and we had another Dalit relative who was also at the same wedding. My dad went to him and he said, Yampa, I'll say it in Tamil first and then I'll translate it in English. Yampa, ivan parupa ellarukkum oorukkellaam poitu nama Dalitnu solnukaran. Right? In other words, look at this fellow, he's going around the whole world saying, I am Dalit, right? And then this other relative looked to me and said this, right? It broke my heart. This Dalit Christian relative looked at me and said, Chi. Namma and the P jadi kadiyaduppa. Right? This Dalit Christian relative told me, chi, which is like a common Indian expression that I don't need to explain further. Namma and the P jadi kadiyaduppa is, we are not that shitty caste. And then it broke my heart. How come some identities are granted honor and how come some identities are relegated to this area of shame and nothingness? Why is that the case? It informs everything that I think about and write, right? So for today, for me, when I say Dalit Christian identity, Dalit is like that rudder. It enables me to see complicities in injustice within Christian communities. It also enables me to see complicities in injustice wherever I am in various parts of the world, right? And literature then also, Dalit literature has that kind of rudder. It goes in a direction and the direction is liberation and freedom, right? I could say more, but I feel like I have spoken for quite a bit. And I should stop here and look to Dr. Cherian here to facilitate more discussion. I'm really interested in, a two-way conversation here. So I'm going to stop here for now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Am I audible? Yeah. Thank you very much for a very insightful and illuminating presentation. I was just thinking about some of the things you said. On the one hand, there is the liberation that comes from the new vision that people converted to. In the case of Ambedkar, it was to Buddhism, and in the case of many others, it was to Christianity. But it wasn't so much institutional Christianity that attracted, as you pointed out, but the liberating message of Jesus who stood with the marginalized. There have been other emancipatory movements here in India before this. You had the Bhakti cult, for example, of Basavanna, for example, in Karnataka. But that itself ossified itself into another caste, that of the Lingayats in this case. Things get co-opted like this. Liberation movements get co-opted. And at the moment, there seems to be some kind of attempt at co-opting again through a discourse that is being generated from a very different angle, this time one of nationalism and so on. And it's somehow, once again, that the idea that only those who belong to this religion are truly belong to the nation as such. So this attempt to construct the nation around the Hindu religion, for example, is an attempt at co-opting. And in fact, that's happening everywhere in India, trying to, bring Dalits into this awareness or this consciousness that they have actually gone astray in choosing an alien religion that came from elsewhere. In other words, they seem to want to hammer down this trope that Christianization is Westernization, which actually it is not. In fact, in the West too, the struggle is for dignity, where the African Americans and as slaves chose, again, the same parallel. The scripture was thrust to a group of people who were deracinated, but they used it as a weapon against their oppressors. So but even there, the attempt is now for example, the backlash, the pushback against critical race theory and an attempt at white supremacist, and no amount of their being Christian will take away from this supremacist, position that many of them hold at the same time as they are Christians. So we are seeing this in both continents. Over there in the United States, particularly, with the Black Lives Matter being now the attempt is to discredit that as anti-national, because these people are arguing for defunding the police. They're striking at the roots of whatever. So in both places, here in India and in the United States, we see these attempts at producing some kind of powerful counter discourse, which wants to swallow this up, and so on. So in this context, what shape, what form will resistance take in these new contexts? You're muted.
That is a great question. And that's why I actually kind of ended where I ended, right? About that story, that encounter at the wedding for me between me and my relative, because it is so easy to get co-opted. All of us want to, well, all of us, most of us want to believe that we are not co-opted, right? Now, I was a free kid. I was as free as one can be. I don't know if you remember how I was at St. Joseph's College. I didn't care about anything. I was just laughing, having a good time. I was racing motorbikes, and that was my world. I was just a happy young adult, right? Happy young adult. But I really do think I was co-opted, completely co-opted. Now, I might not have been co-opted by Hindutva at that point, right? By this kind of nationalistic fervor. But what is co-optation at the end of the day, right? We are all co-opted in all these little ways, right? Little ways. Whether we're talking about Hindutva-based nationalism, whether we are talking about a kind of Christian imagination that is embarrassed about Dalit identity, where folks see shame in their own identities, Or whether, we're talking about things like patriarchy, where, sometimes men will say, but I am a good man, right? It doesn't matter whether I am a good man or not. The system of patriarchy still produces victims. It's violent, right? So I'm so glad that you're pointing to this notion of cooptation, which is such a powerful but subtle force.
Which, as you say, as you point out in your book, is a form of structured violence.
It is. It really is. And I think I would say, looking back, I was co-opted and I didn't even know. I was co-opted and I did not even know, right? So co-optation is this thing that we are not aware of until we have that critical lens. And, my argument then to kind of focus on today's colloquium, the theme is that Dalit, right? Dalit as a prefix, as a perspective, as a way of writing, allows for us not to be co-opted, right? So that's maybe I'll just stop there. Yeah.
As you said, Dalits, and then there's the Christian part of it. Christianity at the moment is going through all kinds of transitions. On the one hand, there's a kind of pietistic Christianity, which only wants to emphasize the transcendental dimension. That is the relationship between man and God. But the other part of Christianity, which actually declares that there is no meaning in the transcendental dimension until the immanent one, the one of how we relate to our fellow beings. If we don't love our neighbor and ourselves, and the idea is that who's our neighbor, the concept of the Good Samaritan, where it says that everyone, all, especially the stranger, especially those who have been conventionally known as the strangers, unless we affirm their dignity, we cannot claim to love God. So where do you see this going, even in the Christian world?
Christianity can also be easily co-opted. That's why Dalit, again, there as a prefix in Dalit Christianity is so important, right? That's the thing that I want to keep just reminding all of us, that Dalit is what enables that resistance to co-optation. Otherwise, if I simply say I'm Christian, I can be co-opted very easily, right? Where my Dalit identity does not even matter to me. I'm just Christian. All Christians are my, siblings and so on and so forth. It's this, I have to watch my mouth here because we are live. So if this was an in-person discussion, I would have said more things. Sure. So I won't swear, but there's a story in the Bible. I'll say two things, right? One, there's a story in the Bible. Christians have this practice called communion. Some people call it the Eucharist. Some people call it the Lord's table. And this is a ritual, right? In church settings where people get together and they break bread or wine or grape juice, depending on the denomination, as a way to remember the life of Jesus and the implications that the life of Jesus has for Christian communities. That is the communion, Eucharist, Lord's table. There's a story in the Bible, right? This is early Christian community right after Jesus, maybe like 40, 50 years after Jesus' time. So this is very early Christian community coming together for this communion practice. And the story is told in scripture that the rich actually went first. Back then, it was not a symbolic meal. It was a full meal. People literally ate together, right? But what happened then was that the rich went first. And they basically, let's say, if there's chicken biryani, let's say, they ate all the chicken. And they ate all the biryani too. And left only the raita for those who came after, right? And so the poor, even back then, just 50 years after Jesus' time, the rich had a way of co-opting Christian symbols by marginalizing the poor, who were actually the very ones who were drawn to Jesus in the beginning, right?
Now, St. Paul protests against this, or is it?
So this is Paul, right, protesting against this practice, right? And now here we are 2,000 years away from that, and still asking the same question about is Christianity being co-opted? And the answer is yes, always. Is there an element of resistance? Yes, always. And Dalit is that element of resistance, which reminds us that the rich cannot co-opt a particular religious tradition, right?
Yeah.
And Dr. Etienne is here, and that's where I also have to give a quick grateful nod to Dr. Etienne. So both Dr. Etienne and Dr. Cherian were my English professors during my time at St. Joseph's College, and Dr. Etienne and I, we come from the same town. We have roots in the same town, Pondicherry.
Right. Right. Now, I think it's time for questions from the group that is here. So I will open it out to questions. We've got, how are you doing for time, John? Can you hang around?
I am doing okay on time, but you'll have to call the shots about when is the end time. So whenever you say is the end, is the end.
Yeah, apocalyptic tones. When is the end time? I think we will go for another 10 minutes. Is that okay? The organizers, Drishti, how does that sound? Drishti or anybody else who is organizing, Vijeta? Can we go for another 10 minutes? I think some of you are not here.
So, to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, shit. Okay, sorry. So we have 10 to 15 minutes. So yeah, no problem.
Sure. Great. So, John is here. He's ready for your questions. And you can shoot straight away.
If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put it in this chat box, or the chat box is on YouTube.
Also there. Is the chat box accessible to you, John? Yeah. Okay. Great. Those who want a question, using the audio mode, just unmute and ask your question. Feel free to ask.
So we are also streaming this on YouTube. So we are waiting to see if there are any questions there. So
okay, please look at that and you pass that on here.
Yeah. Just give us a minute. Yeah,
sure. So while the questions come, there's another question to you, John, and that is, you spoke about grief, which is this thing about bearing witness and memory, holding memories. How important that is. You got the Holocaust, memorial, and how important that is to, because those who forget are condemned to repeat history, So the importance for you, I think that the term that you use in your book is grief. That is to go over, to experience remorse also on the part of the oppressor, or those who come from that, community of those who were oppressed. When they come into consciousness and awareness, then it calls for remorse. Can you elaborate a little more on that? Okay, and also, will this way of remorse be a way of binding people, the former oppressor and the former oppressed coming together, and one forgiving and the other, kind of asking for forgiveness? Yeah.
I think Dalit allows us to ask, right, broadly speaking, who suffers the most in any particular social arrangement, right? And if we don't ask that question constantly every day, then we get co-opted, to kind of return back to that theme, right? But grief comes in when we do ask that question, who suffers the most in a social arrangement? And then we know who suffers the most in a social arrangement. And sometimes that comes as news. It certainly came that way to me when I was conscientized, right? Sometimes it comes as news, and when it comes as news, it can allow for grief. It does not always lead to grief, but it can, right? And that's really my point. I'll give you another example. I already referred to Bama's, where she's talking about the writers' workshop that she went to in Paris, right? Now, I came to the United States in 2010, and I was at Princeton Theological Seminary, which is just across the street from Princeton University, right? Which is an Ivy League university. I've taken courses there, engaged with professor students there. I went for an event there. I went for an event that was organized by the Hindu student Samaj there. There, in the event, a person referred to the Kairlanji murders in India, where a whole Dalit family was murdered in broad daylight. This is, if one is Dalit, they will know this. And as a matter of fact, if one is just well read in the Indian context, they will know this. When the Kairlanji incident was mentioned by a Dalit commentator, a dominant caste person in the audience shouted out, interrupted the speaker by saying, "Where is the evidence?" And it broke my heart, it broke my heart really, because, oh my God, how can anybody ask for evidence for infamous murder committed in broad daylight in Kairlanji, right? And I'm offering that example because grief could have happened. That person could have said, "Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Oh my God, I want to grieve with you. I want to be in solidarity with you." And yet, that moment of encounter disallowed that rather than allowed that, right? And so for me, grief is so important, because rather than not being stopped in our tracks, right, we just keep going on and on in violent social arrangements. And that's my fear. And I think that grief, in helping us to stop and register by asking who is suffering the most in the social arrangement, then can allow us to go towards a different possibility in which people, even across various identities, can work together. But that doesn't come naturally, right?
Yeah, I couldn't resist making drawing an analogy here, because Shashi Tharoor says something about the British looting India for 200 years, and he made a pitch for reparations. Of course, more of a kind of academic argument, that was all. But here you've had colonialism, internal colonialism, for thousands of years. And now when there is, the demand for justice, even reservations, which are in fact just an attempt from a constitutional point of view to redress the balance, but even that will be nothing if social change doesn't happen. Even that is being resented, you see. So that's only underscores your point that where there needs to be grief and where there needs to be remorse, one finds very little of it. Okay, questions have come up on the screen.
I see one here about, I've spoken about Dalit identity and Dalit experience with so much joy and laughter that it is infectious. Can you please tell us if there are moments of joy like this in your book on personal experience? Dalit communities are actually very joyful despite all the injustice that they suffer. If you hung out with Dalit communities, you'll know this, right? And so, and I hung out and I hang out with Dalit communities. So the joy is very much there. I generally live by the motto, laugh or you will die. I really kind of derive that from Dalit experience, because Dalit communities do this all the time. Are there moments of joy in my book? In my personal experience, there are many. In the book, it goes in a slightly different direction. There are elements of joy in the book. But the book itself goes in a slightly different direction. And there's a comment here that's saying grief is an important aspect of life. If one cannot grieve, how can one have joy? So that is a good point here. And Dr. Arulmani has a question. What paths to reconciliation via acknowledging caste and caste politics do you see opening up within Christianity in India? Christianity is an institutional religion, right? It can be a people's movement. It is also an institutional religion. When Christianity gets co-opted by whatever force, right? Christianity can be co-opted by religion, and the dominant religion in India is Hinduism. It can easily be co-opted by that kind of right-wing extremist Hindutva kind of nationalism. And this happens all the time in India. There are several leaders of Christian churches who shake hands and garland people from Hindu nationalist groups. as to get a piece of the pie, right? And what that does is actually allows Christianity to be co-opted. How can you resist something that you're garlanding? I mean, that's the question, right? How is that possible? How is that possible? So that's one. But Christianity can also be co-opted by things like class. It can also be co-opted by gender, right? That's the Eucharist example I gave you about, the rich kind of taking prominent places and the poor being further marginalized. If the poor converted to Christianity, if those on the margins of caste converted to Christianity for liberation and then come find themselves in church and are alienated again, right, then that's what some Dalit commentators would call twice alienated, and that continues to happen even today, right? So what paths are there? And I think that Dalit rudder, that Dalit prefix is that path towards opening up possibilities for Christianity in India to be liberatory, I think.
Question about strangers, that's the one, because I mentioned it in one of my sentences, which is this. Now, the stranger is the migrant, for example. Here for us, in Bangalore, we have people coming from far corners of the country to work here. They are our strangers in the sense that we're different. It all depends upon how we treat them. Do we treat them as people deserving of all the dignity that that is their right? Or do we treat them instrumentally as people whose labor we use, etc.? So that's the point. Yeah. And strangers in the American context would be those who are seeking refuge at the borders because they are fleeing highly oppressive conditions. Most of it actually created by hegemonic U.S. power itself. Oppressive conditions in the Caribbean. And these people are fleeing that, and they come into the borders, and they're being turned away by people who, on the one hand, claim that they're Christians, and on the other hand, are absolutely rude to strangers. John, on strangers, he's already made a comment there. Yeah. Yeah. Any further questions?
Somebody's asking me about, the relative at the wedding story, and if any of my relatives have read my book. Me, I'll say my biggest joy has been actually talking about Dalit politics with my siblings, my older brother and my younger sister. We have conversations that we have never had when we were growing up. So, it has allowed actually for a lot of joy also, while, there are still occurrences where people will say this or that.
I think we are, slowly coming to the end of our allotted time. The apocalypse is here. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Further questions?
From YouTube?
I don't think we have any questions from the YouTube chat.
Right. Thank you. I think, John, from my side and on behalf of all my colleagues, thank you very, very much. On behalf of our students also, it's been wonderful that you were able to. What is your normal wake-up time?
No, I wake up early now. We have a 4-year-old, so she slaps us and wakes us up. But today is a little earlier. But this is just, I'm so honored and grateful to have been invited. Really.
Sir.
No, thank you. Really, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Over to Anushka or whoever is handling it. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was very, very entertaining and insightful to hear this conversation. I had a lot of fun, and in a good way, also in a bad way, where there was more to imagine and picture, which was again more trouble inside the brain. But I think we need it, and it's very essential to know these things and to work on them in some way, at least, because I think only some people work on it, most of them don't. But thank you so much for this conversation. It was lovely having you both talk to us, and thank you everybody for coming and joining us for this event. So there's a form on the chat box. Just once we'll be sending it in a while. Please do fill it up and give us your feedback. And thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Thank you so much, sirs, for this day. And on Sunday, I hope to see everyone for Ma'am Sukirtarani. I'm sorry if I got the name wrong. For Ma'am Sukirtarani in the same place with the same link. And good night, and thank you so much.
Just a question. John, I would, if anyone wants to, take this further with you, would it be possible for them to contact you?
Definitely, definitely. If you just search for John Bhoopalan CMU, you'll get my email, and you can feel free to reach out via social media too if that's easier. But yes, definitely, 100%. Just grateful for this conversation. Thank you again for the invitation. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Take care and all the best.